remaining when this matter returns following question period. Déclaration de député.
Statements by members.
Honourable Member for Don Valley West.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise in the House today to highlight an event taking place this coming week in Toronto, the Canadian International Auto Show. This show is the largest in Canada with an attendance of some 300,000 people. For 10 days, individuals from across Canada and other countries will come to explore the latest trends and products from over 30 automotive brands. The show is always the kickstart of the retail sales year, and I'm thrilled to report both 2013 and 2014 were record-breaking years in Canada for Canadian auto sales, with over 1.8 million vehicles sold in Canada this year alone. I wish our automotive manufacturers and their dealers the very best on this year's auto show, and I invite all members and all interested Canadians to come and attend the show at the Metro Toronto Convention Centre from February 13 to 22 to view the latest in car designs, models, and technology. There is something for everybody at this year's Canadian International Auto Show. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Surrey North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise proudly today to acknowledge some of the amazing activities that's taking place in my community of Surrey North. On February 21st, I will be walking in the coldest night of the year, hosted by the Surrey Urban Mission to raise money for the hungry and homeless, and to raise awareness about the issue of poverty, low-income housing, homelessness, and mental health. The Surrey Urban Mission, under the leadership of John HoC and volunteers, works tirelessly to provide for one of the most vulnerable populations in our community, and I applaud their commitment to these important issues. I also want to, Mr. Speaker, congratulate Spice Radio 1200 AM and Shishma Dutt for their Raise Your Hands Against Racism campaign. This initiative coincides with the Holi Festival, or the Festival of Colours, on March 7th, when city halls around the Lower Mainland will invite everyone to place a colourful handprint and sign their anti-racism tableau. I will proudly be adding my handprints to the tableau in Surrey, and I hope all residents will join me in doing so, Mr. Speaker.
Wonderful, wonderful. The Honourable Member for Chilliwack-Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in the House today to honour a constituent of mine, Dr. Gwen Point. On February 4th, Dr. Gwen Point was installed as Chancellor of the University of the Fraser Valley at a ceremony in Chilliwack. Dr. Point's connection to the University of the Fraser Valley stretches back decades to when she and her husband, former Lieutenant Governor of British Columbia, Stephen Point, enrolled in the school. Since that time, Dr. Point has served as a teacher, scholar, administrator, and board member. She's held a number of offices in government, including that of Chatelaine of British Columbia. As a member of the Skocal First Nation, Dr. Point is a respected Stalo leader, mentor, and cultural advisor. She has contributed her cultural knowledge and experience to numerous books, conferences, workshops, and committees. Her accomplishments in the field of education, child and family services, and First Nations organizations are too numerous to mention in the limited time I have. I want to congratulate Dr. Point on her new role as Chancellor and wish her all the best as she helps lead the University of Fraser Valley into the future.
The Honourable Member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, last week was a special one for Bedford's Philip Reitman. Mr. Reitman and his wife Dorothy happily celebrated their 65th wedding anniversary on Thursday. Mr. Reitman also marked another milestone last week, the 70th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp. Mr. Reitman spent a year and a half there, but for this Auschwitz survivor, his story is one of man's love and forgiveness triumphing over evil. He regularly speaks to students about his experience in a death camp, despite finding it very difficult and emotional to do so. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate Philip and Dorothy and to thank Mr. Reitman for helping make sure we never forget.
The Honourable Member for Brampton-Springdale.
Mr. Speaker, last week the Liberal member from York West demonstrated her party's ignorance on terrorism when she said that if ISIL attacks Canada, it's because our Prime Minister put us in that position. The reports from last weekend state that while speaking at a Liberal training session in Toronto, the member from Trinity Spadina said he thinks, and I quote, "We're dropping bombs on people instead of building civil society, and that needs to change." He also called Canada a war maker. On this side of the House, we don't believe that defending against ISIL terror makes Canada a war maker. We also know we can't build a society with terrorists, Mr. Speaker. They aren't civil. In closing, the MP from Trinity Spadina also noted that Canada needs to respond to world events in a mature and precise way. It's too bad the Liberal leader won't take his advice, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Canadian economy is going through a rough patch, businesses and owners have a right to know what direction the government's going to take. Workers and employers are wondering what government programs will look like in the future, and the minister's not even prepared to table a budget. They are lacking the people, intellectuals to work on this. Contrary to the current Prime Minister, we would have many people available to work on this. Thank you.
The honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to highlight a vital part of our education system. The Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association has recognized Canadian School Counselling Week, a week dedicated to increasing public awareness of the scope of programs and services that characterize the important role played by the school counselling profession all across Canada. In addition to helping students with their mental health and overall well-being, school counselors also make significant contributions to the personal, social, academic, and career development of our young people. I would also like to recognize the fact that the Canadian Counselling and Psychotherapy Association are celebrating their 50th anniversary in 2015. I want to take this opportunity to congratulate the thousands of mental health professionals who make up the association and to thank them for contributing to the well-being of Canadians for half a century.
The honourable member for McLeod.
Mr. Speaker, as a father of 2 daughters, violence against women and girls is a profound concern. I am proud to say under the leadership of our Prime Minister, this government is working hard with community stakeholders to address this issue. Our commitment is clear: funding the Global Maternal, Newborn and Child Health Initiative, a national action plan to address violence against Aboriginal women and girls, laws enacting against cyberbullying, and in the Status of Women Committee, of which I'm a proud member, we're in the midst of a comprehensive study on best practices to stop violence against women. The statistics on this issue are concerning. 1 in 3 women across the planet will be beaten or raped in their lifetime. That's 1 billion women and girls. On February 14th, I will be participating in 1 Billion Rising with the Rowan House and Pitcher Creek emergency shelters in my riding. I encourage all of my colleagues in this House to lend their voice to this fight, especially the men. We have to change the narrative. This is not just violence against women. This is also about men perpetrating violence against women. Thank you.
The honourable member for Thunder Bay Rainy River.
Mr. Speaker, let me draw the attention of all members, and indeed all Canadians, to an event this Valentine's Day called Have a Heart Day, sponsored by the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society of Canada. This is your opportunity to stand with First Nations children for the chance to grow up safely at home, get a good education, be healthy, and be proud of their cultures. In short, to know First Nations children have the same services and opportunities as all other Canadian children. Explore the Have a Heart website for more information, to send an e-Valentine to the Prime Minister or to your Member of Parliament. Remember Jordan's principle and help put an end to government red tape, depriving First Nations children of government services available to all others. Support Shannon's dream for safe schools and equitable education for First Nations children. This Valentine's Day, show your heart. Plan your own celebration or join one of the many nationwide Have a Heart events. Help every First Nations child to be proud and successful because their dreams matter too.
The honourable member for Huron-Bruce.
Mr. Speaker, thanks to our government, Canadian families can be assured that their hard-earned money is making its way back to their bank accounts. Our plan is simple and we stand by it. We trust parents to invest in their children and spend their money as they see fit. Soon, families in my riding of Huron-Bruce will receive just under $2,000 annually per child under the age of 6 and $720 per year for the youth aged 6 to 17. The NDP and Liberals, on the other hand, want to take this money away and spend it on big government bureaucracy instead. Mr. Speaker, despite the opposition and third-party Liberals who have positioned themselves against middle-class families, I am proud that our government is giving money back to each and every family with children in Canada. Thank you.
The honourable member for Scarborough Southwest.
On February 15th, 1965, for the last time, the Canadian Red Ensign, bearing the Union Jack and the shield of the Royal Arms of Canada, was lowered. Then, on the stroke of noon, our maple leaf was raised for the first time. Words spoken then still ring true today. The flag is the symbol of the nation's unity, for it, beyond any doubt, represents all the citizens of Canada without distinction of race, language, belief, or opinion.
It flies above government buildings, businesses, schools, homes, our diplomatic missions, and our parliament. It is worn on the uniforms of our proud forces who defend our Canadian values and our future.
In peace and acceptance, our flag is respected the world over. Let it forever be a beacon of hope and a symbol to us as Canadians to strive for greatness. Mr. Speaker, on February 15th, we'll celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Canadian flag. May it continue to fly over our great nation, strong and free.
The honourable member, l'honorable député d'Ottawa-Orléans.
I was pleased to join Michael Rosen, President of Tree Canada, at the Ecology Ottawa event, Everyone Loves Trees.
This event coincided with Tu B'Shvat, the Jewish New Year of Trees. With the counterculture movement of the 1960s, this holiday has morphed into a Jewish Ecology Day and promotes ecological awareness.
Scouting Days. And in 2011, this House approved my private member's motion to declare the Wednesday of the last full week of September National Tree Day. At last Tuesday's event, Ecology Ottawa urged each of us to adopt a tree. The typical Canadian produces enough carbon dioxide during his or her lifespan to feed 15 trees. So once again, I urge the people of Orleans to get on with it and plant trees to compensate. Whether you want to adopt 1 tree or 15, or again, you would like more information on caring for trees, I encourage you to go to treeottawa.org and adopt a tree today. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Deputy.
The honourable member for Lac Saint-Louis.
Today to congratulate Health Partners International of Canada, an NGO headquartered in the West Island of Montreal, on 25 years of delivering essential medicines and medical supplies to vulnerable communities, particularly those in the developing world. Since 1990, remarkably, Health Partners has delivered over 20 million treatments to such communities. Health Partners collects medicines and supplies that are donated by medical suppliers, including both research-based and generic pharmaceutical companies, and creates physician travel packs, including mother-child health kits, which are then given to physicians and other volunteers traveling to areas of need abroad.
In Canada and in other developed countries, we are lucky to have easy access to medicines, including painkillers that we might need someday. Thanks to its extraordinary vision and its ability to form partnerships, HPIC contributes to lessening the sufferance of a great many inhabitants of our planetary village.
The honourable member for the Yukon.
Mr. Speaker, despite the opinions of the Liberals and the NDP, a job-killing carbon tax is not what our country needs at this time, especially Northern Canadians who already have a higher cost of living. Our government will continue to deliver on our low tax plan that will create jobs for all Canadians, and we won't weigh them down with unnecessary tax hikes. Mr. Speaker, it's simply a reckless policy, and our Conservative government will make sure that as we lower taxes, not only for Canadian families, but for Canadian businesses, steps like reducing the GST from 7% to 5%, that we're taking care of Canadian families, their needs and their businesses to give them the greatest opportunity. Mr. Speaker, we will reject any opportunity that the Liberals try and create to raise taxes on Canadian families, and we expect that the NDP and the Liberals who maintain this plan will be soundly rejected by Canadians who know that it's a Conservative government and their low tax plan that is best for Canadian families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pontiac. Today we've learned that the Prime Minister's current Chief of Staff will be obliged to testify in the criminal trial involving a payment that was made by Nigel Wright.
Novak will be called to testify. And of course, we may even see the Prime Minister called to the stand. maybe we will finally hear from the Prime Minister about what he meant when he told Nigel Wright that the Mike Duffy payments were, quote, good to go, or why he claimed that no one in his office except Nigel Wright knew about the payments, when emails clearly show that many more were involved. Or why did the Prime Minister say he didn't know about illegal payments when records show he did? Last summer at the PMO, it was, quote, difficult to imagine the PM testifying. I'd say it doesn't take much imagination now to see the PM take the stand. And hopefully Canadians will then finally get truthful answers from this Conservative government about the PMO orchestrated cover-up of the Senate scandal.
Honourable Member for Etobicoke Lakeshore.
Mr. Speaker, since coming to office, our government has made it a duty to ensure that Canadian families have the support they need to grow and thrive. That is why our Prime Minister announced we would be putting hard-earned money back into the pockets of Canadian mums and dads with the family tax cut plan and the enhanced childcare benefit. Soon, families in my riding of Etobicoke Lakeshore will receive just under $2,000 annually per child under the age of 6. When you add it up, a family of 3 children will receive nearly $36,000 by the time their children turn 6 years old. But notwithstanding his lack of experience, the Liberal leader has shown that same old Liberal Party arrogance by pledging to reverse our tax breaks. They will take this money away from Canadian families. Mr. Speaker, unlike the members on that side of the House, we will continue to stand up for Canadian families.
Right on. Oral questions. Question orale. L'honorable député.
The honourable leader of the.
Clear message. Our cities need a real long-term federal investments in infrastructure, affordable housing, and public transit. Decades of neglect by Liberals and Conservatives have left our cities falling behind. Why do the Conservatives refuse to invest in making more livable cities?
The Honourable Parliament Senator of Infrastructure and Community.
Mr. Speaker, our government has introduced the largest infrastructure plan in Canadian history, $75 billion over the next decade, Mr. Speaker, and this includes the $53 billion New Building Canada plan, which provides significant support for municipalities, provinces, and territories. And in less than a year, Mr. Speaker, numerous projects have already been approved. An estimated $5 billion worth of projects have already been identified for funding. Projects include a new public transit system in Edmonton, highway systems in many other provinces, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hull-Aylmer. I think the Conservative government is not listening to the city mayors. 18 big city mayors are calling on the government to invest in public transit, infrastructure, and housing in order to stimulate job creation. Before they'd even left Ottawa, the infrastructure minister flatly rejected their appeal. Why do the Conservatives insist on giving tax breaks to the rich instead of investing in job creation for the middle class?
Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, in actual fact, municipalities and provinces own 95% of the public infrastructure in Canada. And notwithstanding this fact, the federal government is still there as a major partner, Mr. Speaker. And we're also taking a leadership role with respect to federally owned infrastructure. Last fall, the Prime Minister announced $6 billion for federally owned infrastructure. These important investments will be made at National Historic Sites, Canadian Armed Forces facilities, research centres, and Coast Guard facilities, just to name a few, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hull-Aylmer. The big city mayors represent 2/3 of Canadians. They're calling for public transit for people who are stuck daily in traffic jams. They're calling for social housing. They're calling for infrastructure that's safer and more effective. Why do the Conservatives refuse to cooperate with the municipalities and provinces?
Mr. Speaker, as I've clearly explained, we are making record investments in public infrastructure across the country, and this includes record investments in public transit, Mr. Speaker. Since we formed government in 2006, we have invested close to $8 billion in public transit alone. This includes, Mr. Speaker,
important investments in the new LRT system in my own home community of Waterloo Region.
The honourable member for Burnaby, New Westminster.
Yesterday we asked a simple question to the minister about the new anti-terrorism bill. Once again, we got no answer. Under Bill C-51, the CSIS's powers would be expanded beyond intelligence gathering and would now include the power to disrupt suspected terrorist activities before they can occur. Can the minister clearly explain what type of activity would be authorized under this new power? The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I thank the member for the question. This is a very important question. In fact, there has been some erroneous reporting and some inaccurate reporting around this subject. CSIS's mandate to disrupt threats will be based on the definition of, quote, threats to the security of Canada. It's found in Section 2 of the CSIS Act. It has been based on CSIS's primary investigative mandate since 1984. And the definition includes espionage, sabotage, foreign influenced activities, terrorism, subversion, and explicitly excludes lawful advocacy, protest, or dissent.
The honourable member for Burnaby, New Westminster.
It seems the more questions we ask on this, Mr. Speaker, the fewer answers that we're actually getting. And Canadians deserve better. They actually deserve concrete and fulsome answers to the questions we're asking. Now, allowing CSIS to go beyond the collection of intelligence and into the business of enforcement, the disruption of threats, is a major shift. It's the duty of the government to clearly explain what is meant by this change and why it is necessary. What kinds of activities would C-51 allow CSIS to undertake, and who will determine when charter rights, Canadians' rights and freedoms, are threatened and judicial oversight is required?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
The short answer, Mr. Speaker, would be, of course, a judge, but I'll point out that the powers being granted to CSIS will be subject to strict limits. CSIS will be forbidden from taking any measures that caused, intentionally or by negligence, death or bodily harm, violated the sexual integrity of any individual, or willfully obstructed, perverted or defeated the course of justice. Now, Mr. Speaker, CSIS will not become a law enforcement agency. CSIS employees would not be given powers of peace officers, such as the ability to arrest or imprison individuals, and CSIS has always been and will continue to be required to seek a warrant.
The Honourable Member for Barassa. Mr. Speaker, the budget for the Building Canada Fund for Infrastructure has been cut from $2 billion to $210 million this year. That's a 90% drop. Retail businesses are dropping like flies, and the manufacturing sector has lost 400,000 jobs. These industries need infrastructure to be competitive and create good jobs. On Tuesday in the House, the Prime Minister let drop that we're in an economic crisis. Is it true that we're in an economic crisis, or did the Prime Minister slip up?
Speaker, since the depths of the global recession, almost 1.2 million net new jobs have been created. Over 80% full-time, over 80% in the private sector, and over 60% in high-wage industries. However, Canada is not immune to the economic challenges beyond our borders. That is why our Conservative government is working hard to help create jobs and economic prosperity. While we're focused on creating jobs, the Liberal leader has the same old high-tax, high-debt agenda that will threaten jobs and set working families back, Mr. Speaker.
Here, here. The Honourable Member for Kings Ham.
Speaker, when Canada's premiers call for increased infrastructure investment, the Finance Minister calls them oblivious to economics. Yet economic experts like David Dodge, the IMF, and the Bank of Canada agree that there's never been a better time to make infrastructure investments here in Canada. The Conservatives aren't listening. In fact, they slashed the Build Canada Fund by 90% to create a notional surplus on the eve of an election. Will the government heed the premiers and the economic experts, reverse these harmful cuts, fix Canada's infrastructure, and create jobs and growth for Canadians?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, once again, that is incorrect. Furthermore, I would add that, Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from the Liberals, either on investing, on infrastructure, or on balancing the budget. When they were government, they did so little on infrastructure. And how did they balance the budget, Mr. Speaker? By slashing transfers to health care and to education, by starving municipalities Our government has been repairing the damage ever since.
The honourable member for Kings Hands.
Speaker, adding $160 billion to the national debt doesn't sound like the Conservatives are doing a very good job repairing damage. The Conservatives are fudging the numbers on the Build Canada Fund. They're inflating them by spanning them over a decade, when in fact 70% of the funds won't even flow until after 2019. They could even get even more creative with their accounting, Mr. Speaker. They could span the fund over 100 years and create a really, really, really big number. Meanwhile, in reality, they've actually cut the funds by 90% for the next 2 years to create this notional surplus on the eve of an election. When will they stop misleading Canadians with creative accounting and actually fix Canada's infrastructure?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
We're making record investments, Mr. Speaker. The New Building Canada plan has been open for business since last March. In less than a year, Mr. Speaker, projects representing an estimated $5 billion have already been identified for funding, Mr. Speaker. We are there as a major partner with municipalities and provinces. We are renewing infrastructure. We are creating jobs, prosperity, and enhancing the quality of life for all Canadians.
Excuse me, the honourable member for Ottawa Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the world is currently coordinating its response to ISIS-inspired terrorism and extremism. Canada should be at the table and not on the sidelines. A major security conference in Munich is happening this week to discuss terrorism. 20 world leaders are attending, along with some 60 foreign and defence ministers. Well, very simple question, Mr. Speaker, to the government. Will Canada be represented at this important international summit? Yes or no?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Foreign Affairs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member opposite has gotten up and asked questions about our response to ISIS, and we have responded to the areas that he's been concerned about. We've responded in the areas of sexual violence, protecting minorities, dealing with criminals, war criminals, dealing with refugees. And we're proud of the effort that our country has put into to dealing with this issue, dealing with the crisis that's in Iraq and Syria, and we'll continue to work on the issue.
The honourable member for Esquimalt-Wanda-Fuga.
Mr. Speaker, many Canadians are concerned that Bill C-51 goes too far by lumping together legal dissent with terrorist activity. And when it comes to critical anti-terrorism outreach at home, the Conservatives are still missing in action. The only counter-radicalization program the minister can point to has been on the drawing board since 2013, but it still hasn't been rolled out, and when it is, it's not going to get any new funding. Is this the minister's only plan to work with communities to counter radicalization?
Hear, 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 hear. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, there are numerous ways in which we are countering radicalization, including the ability now to remove material that is seen to incite or provoke terrorism. But beyond that, Mr. Speaker, we have cultural roundtables, we have outreach. The security forces themselves are very actively engaged in that. But I want to point out the honourable member quotes selectively from the CERC report. The report goes on to state that the committee is confident that it has the expertise and ability to effectively take on new challenges. It goes on to say the committee has confidence in its current ability to adapt to measures and remains relevant and effective in providing proper accountability to Canada's security intelligence activities. They should quote the entire...
L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Alfred Pellan. In order to combat radicalization, the federal government has to work with the communities concerned. But instead, the Conservatives are using the threat of terrorism to advance their own political agenda. Experts fear this approach may be counterproductive. Everyone agrees terrorism is a threat. Does the minister realize this issue is too important to use it as a vote-getter? I'd like to thank my colleague for the question. Mr. Speaker, there are lots of opportunities for the government and government agencies to consult with communities and efforts to combat radicalization.
Of playing politics. This is an issue of imminent threats. This is an issue that we are adapting to in an evolving threat environment. That's why this legislation is brought forward, Mr. Speaker. That's why these efforts are ongoing, and that's why the members opposite should support.
L'honorable député de Pierrefonds-Dollard.
The honourable member for Pierrefonds-Dollard.
Jobs to foreign workers. Migrant workers like Chris and Jonah Pineda have had their wages stolen by their employers. Yet the minister is so confident that the employers are cooperating with the rules of the program that he believes there is no need to conduct any one-side inspections. After the big announcement, nothing changes. When is the minister finally going to crack down on employer abuse with real inspections?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, this is the government that brought in the reviews and the inspections, Mr. Speaker. But when we brought this in, the NDP called them. They were concerned. They said they're going to be sending in quasi-police officers. So they were against warrantless access, Mr. Speaker. Now in the House they're rising and saying that they are upset that we haven't had to use it. Well, Mr. Speaker, the reason we haven't had to use it is because the employers are cooperating, Mr. Speaker. We continue to make inspections to make sure that the rules are being followed, and in instances where they're not being followed, we're taking action.
The Honourable Member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Mr. Speaker, it's hard to believe their version when, on the ground, we see quite the opposite. The Employment Minister is extremely trusting. Apparently, he thinks it's enough to simply ask employers if they're abusing the temporary foreign worker program. And if the employer says everything's tickety-boo, the minister closes the file. Hardly the best investigator we've ever seen. The anger of Sandy Nelson and Shauna Jennison-Young is understandable. They lost their jobs to temporary foreign workers. They deserve a genuine investigation. When is the minister going to get serious about these abuses?
Thousands of investigations have taken place and continue to take place. There's a dedicated team at ESDC to conduct these investigations. Employers have been cooperating, Mr. Speaker, but obviously in instances where employers do not cooperate, we do have the tools in place to make sure that the rules are being followed. And as we've said, Mr. Speaker, if the rules are not being followed, we will ensure that employers suffer under the severest consequences. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Rimouski-Nejet-Témiscouat-Basque. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing to celebrate when it comes to the job numbers. The number of full-time jobs has plummeted by almost 12,000 jobs, and most of the new jobs are part-time. Among youth, it's even worse. They're simply giving up on job hunting. Meanwhile, in the U.S., there's some robust economic growth. Is that the strategy of the Conservatives? Wait for the recovery in the U.S. to trickle down to Canada?
Secretary for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, although monthly job numbers are volatile, we are encouraged by the growth in employment in January. Since the depths of the global recession, almost 1.2 million net new jobs have been created. Over 80% are full-time, and an overwhelming majority of these are in the private sector and high-wage industries. However, as long as Canadians are looking for work, our Conservative government will continue to focus on creating jobs and long-term economic prosperity. In contrast, the NDP would push risky, high-tax and high-debt schemes that would kill Canadian jobs and hurt Canada's economy.
Shame on them.
The member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
All the jobs that came were part-time, precarious jobs, and the economy actually lost 12,000 jobs in January, and the Conservatives call the economy spectacular. This is after 2014, when the Canadian economy grew at half the pace of the Canadian population. 400,000 lost manufacturing jobs, and Conservatives say everything is just spectacular. They continue to stick their heads in the sand. We put forward real, concrete solutions to help the manufacturing sector and the small business sector. When are Conservatives actually going to get to work, bring forward a budget and a plan, and help Canadians, the 1.3 million Canadians who are out of work, find their own jobs back again?
Honourable Minister, it's a pleasure to answer my colleague's question. Quite simply, the NDP plan won't work. It would require further spending and would indebt Canadians even further. That debt will have to be paid off by individuals, by people, by workers. But our plan is working well. It's creating jobs, 1.2 million new net jobs since the recession, and we will continue to do that kind of thing to create jobs and keep taxes lower for Canadians.
Southwestern.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he didn't answer the question, because 12,000 full-time jobs disappearing and 47,000 new part-time jobs does not do anything to end poverty in Canada. 4.8 million Canadians struggle to make ends meet. That's 1 in 7 Canadians. This week, their Dignity for All campaign released their plan to end poverty in Canada. They believe that if Canada commits to a plan and takes reasonable steps, the eradication of poverty is within reach. Why is this government refusing to develop a comprehensive plan to end poverty in Canada?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, our government has provided record support for low-income Canadians. For example, we have removed over 1 million low-income Canadians, 380,000 of which are seniors, from the tax rolls entirely. We've increased the amount Canadians can earn without paying taxes. We've created the landmark working income tax benefit to support low-income Canadians who do work, and increased the guaranteed income supplement for the most vulnerable Canadian seniors. But the Liberals and the NDP voted against these measures and against low-income Canadians each and every time.
The honourable member for Argenteuil-Papineau-Mirabel. Dignity for All has released an ambitious plan to reduce and end poverty once and for all in Canada. In a country as rich as ours, it's unimaginable that 4.8 million Canadians are having a hard time making ends meet. Dignity for All sets out 6 areas of activity: jobs, food safety, health, income security, housing, and early childhood education. We have the roadmap. All we need now is the political will to follow it. Why aren't the Conservatives making poverty reduction a priority?
Mr. Speaker, poverty reduction is a priority under our government. Under our government, the share of Canadians living in low-income families is at its lowest level in 3 decades. Wow. Low-income families have seen a 14% increase in their real after-tax income since 2006. Canada's progressive tax system also ensures people with low incomes pay little to no tax. In fact, over 40% of all taxpayers pay no net tax. It's no wonder the federal tax burden is at its lowest level in over 50 years.
The honourable member for St. Paul's.
Conservatives keep trying to deny it, but they actually cut the Building Canada Fund by 90%, and now we're trying to mislead Canadians with empty promises of money years in the future. Yesterday, the big city mayors called on the federal government to immediately invest in transit, housing, and other critical infrastructure. It's time for the Conservatives to do their part to make livable, humane, affordable cities. Will the government flow the increased infrastructure money this year to improve quality of life, create jobs, and spur economic growth?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, that member is misleading the House. Our government's investments in infrastructure are 3 times greater than the previous Liberal government, Mr. Speaker. These investments are building roads, highways, bridges. They're expanding public transit. And what would the opposition do, Mr. Speaker? They would hike taxes, they would run deficits, and they would leave a burden of debt to our kids and our grandkids.
L'Honourable Député de Lac-Saint-Louis.
We know that the Conservatives cut the Building Canada Fund by 90%, and that's before the drop in oil prices revealed this government's blatant lack of economic vision. Now that the government faces the revenue shortfall that comes from putting all its eggs in one basket, should cities and towns in Quebec, where the winter freeze is playing havoc yet again this year with old water infrastructure, should these cities and towns be bracing for even further cuts to the investments they so urgently need to support their communities?
Great question.
The Honourable Parliament Secretary.
And Mr. Speaker, one of the key pillars of the new Building Canada plan is the gas tax fund. And here's what our government has done with respect to the gas tax fund. We've doubled it. We've made it permanent. We're indexing it moving forward. Mr. Speaker, the municipalities receive over $2 billion a year just through gas tax transfer funding, Mr. Speaker. That funding is making a difference today in every municipality across this great country.
The honourable member for Halifax West.
Mr. Speaker, communities across Atlantic Canada have urgent infrastructure needs. Water and sewer, transit and housing, roads and bridges. They're looking for the federal government to be a partner. The Conservatives' response cut funding from $2 billion last year to $210 million this year and next. We need investment now, not in 2020. Why do the Conservatives refuse to partner with municipalities to generate economic growth and help middle-class families?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the Liberals have been out of government for some period of time. I would be pleased to sit down with any member of the Liberal caucus to brief them on the new Building Canada plan and to refresh them on how government accounting and the estimates process works. Mr. Speaker, this Conservative government is making record investments in infrastructure, $2 billion in gas tax funding flowing to municipalities today as we speak. Under the new Building Canada plan already, projects estimated at $5 billion have been identified.
The honourable member for La Salle-et-Mar. Following an explosion in Afghanistan, Master Corporal Paul Franklin lost his legs. Each year, using a doctor's certificate, he must prove to the department that he lost his legs. Twice now, he's had his wheelchair taken away. It's surreal. Master Corporal Franklin is still fighting today, not in Afghanistan, but here, for his case and that of other veterans be treated and processed. When will the minister finally take some action? Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. When the minister was first appointed, he worked very closely with the department and he directed them to reduce forms and processes and obstacles to our veterans who would be applying for benefits. Mr. Speaker, he wants less red tape for our veterans. I also want to point out to the House that the minister reached out personally to the person that was identified in this question. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
Well, veterans are still waiting, and they shouldn't be forced every year to prove the obvious that they are still missing limbs. And it shouldn't take national attention for the government to realize this burden of proof is wrong. Whether it's spending $700,000 to fight veterans in court or denying that they have a sacred obligation to veterans, the Conservatives still don't get it. Will the government stop its policy of requiring veterans to perennially prove that they have lost their limbs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just responded to that question. So let me just point out a few other things. Mr. Speaker, by reducing red tape and backroom bureaucratic expenses at Veterans Affairs Canada, veterans are benefiting. And I would point out, Mr. Speaker, for example, that 90% of the budget at Veterans Affairs Canada actually goes to delivering services to veterans and to their families, as opposed to paying for all these backroom administrative costs. I'd also point out, Mr. Speaker, that it is our government that is opening 9 new offices to deliver new mental health services to veterans across the country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for London Fanshawe.
For a single working mom, childcare means being able to work. For struggling middle-class families, childcare costs are breaking their budgets. Conservatives were elected on a promise to create 125,000 childcare spaces, but they broke that promise to Canadian parents. Conservatives created 0 spaces. Families that cannot access affordable childcare do not have a choice. Why are the Conservatives turning their backs on affordable childcare?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as a member will recall that when we took office, we started to reverse the legacy of transfer payment cuts that was left behind by the Liberals, some $50 billion in cuts, Mr. Speaker. Now, we started to reverse that. And the money that we sent to our provincial partners created over in excess of 260,000 childcare spaces. Now, we're going even further, Mr. Speaker, by introducing the universal childcare benefit like we did, providing families with $100. That is now increasing to $160 for children under the age of 6, but even a step further, $60 for those kids between 6 and 17, and we increased the deduction for childcare expenses by $1,000.
L'honorable député de Pontiac.
The member for Pontiac. In addition to not having created any childcare spaces, the Conservatives have cut existing spaces in the workplace. Some childcare services within the federal public service, including the one in Ottawa, are being forced to close because the Conservatives have stopped subsidizing rent and cleaning costs. Come on, Mr. Speaker. Why are the Conservatives so bent on complicating the lives of our public servant parents who are trying to establish a work-life balance?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, our public service are like all other Canadian families, and under our plan, 100% of Canadian families will benefit from the announcements that we have made, Mr. Speaker. In fact, on average, Canadians will have an additional $1,200 in their pocket because of the changes that we've introduced, Mr. Speaker. I note that, of course, that the NDP and the Liberals would take away that benefit. They take away the $160 a month that families are already getting per child under 6. They take away the $60 a month, Mr. Speaker. They probably would reverse the $1,000 increase in child deductions that we brought in place, Mr. Speaker. Canadian families understand that when it comes to protecting them and their families, they can count.
The honourable member for Kootenay, Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We understand that our immigration system must be fast, flexible, and adaptable to our Canada's labour market needs. On January 1st, our government introduced Express Entry, Canada's next-generation approach to managing and processing applications for our most popular economic immigration programs. Can the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration please explain how this new apparatus will benefit the best and brightest would-be newcomers?
The Honourable Minister of Citizenship and Immigration.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the very hard-working member for Kootenay, Columbia, both for the question and for the amazing work he does for his constituents every day on immigration matters and all other issues of concern to them. Yes, Express Entry is the new system for delivering Canada's economic immigration programs, which remain the best in the world. Instead of just taking the next person who turns up, we will now be selecting and recruiting those with the in-demand skills that Canada's economy needs. That is excellent news for employers. It's great news for temporary workers transitioning to permanent status.
Order. L'honorable député de Rivière-des-Mille.
Honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille.
Eating Disorders Awareness Week wraps up. Canadians are coming together to call this government to action and shed light on the seriousness of eating disorders that affect more than 1 million women and men across Canada. Well, on this side of the House, we're listening, and with our new BeRealCanada.ca campaign, we are taking action. For families struggling with eating disorders, it remains a battle to obtain care. For many, help comes too little, too late. Will the government join us and support our call for a national eating disorder strategy?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for the question, and while I have the floor, I'd also like to thank the member for Oakville, who brought forward a recommendation that the Status of Women Committee investigate this, Mr. Speaker, and I know that they have been working very hard and are coming or have introduced a report, Mr. Speaker, that we'll obviously take a look at. This is a very serious issue. That's why when we first came to office, we started to reverse the billions of dollars in health care cuts that were a hallmark of the Liberal government, Mr. Speaker, by putting those reinvestments in place. Our provincial partners have the resources that they need to invest not only in this, Mr. Speaker, but in so many other areas of health care that suffered under the previous Liberal government.
L'honorable député de... The honourable member for Rivière-des-Mille. The government has told families that they need to wait a year for treatment. Only 4% of women are satisfied with their appearance, and more than half of women with a normal weight want to be thinner. This is a problem that affects women. However, 2 out of every 10 people suffering from anorexia are men. I'll repeat my question. Will the government listen to people who are working on the front lines? Will the government put in place a strategy to deal with eating disorders?
Secretary. Mr. Speaker, this government is listening, and we've started listening from the day we were elected. That's why we reversed the previous health care cuts that were a hallmark of the previous Liberal government, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'd like to commend the member for Oakville for his work on this and the Status of Women Committee. They've been doing a great job on this, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to listen to our health care partners because it's very important, Mr. Speaker. I note that, of course, that we've transferred 6% additionally each and every year that we've been in office. But by example, in Ontario, they've only reinvested 3% of that 6%, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to invest what we need to invest to improve health care benefit for all Canadians, and we'll do that by working with the professionals in the industry. Thank you.
L'honorable député Beauharnois-Salaberry.
The honourable member for Beauharnois-Salaberry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They shouldn't be proud. They've cut many dollars in transfers. Thousands of Canadians living in rural regions and isolated regions, like in Beauharnois-Salaberry, still don't have access to internet. Either the connection is too slow or unstable, or the prices are exorbitant. In the U.S., the minimal connection speed has been increased to 25 megabytes. Here in Canada, we're still at 5 megabytes. And the slowness of our network is adversely affecting regional development. Will the minister Mr. Mr. Speaker, I think that my colleague has failed to monitor debate in the House, nor has she read legislation that we've tabled recently, because we have a program that has existed for several years now to help communities in the north to have access to internet to other communities across the country. Mr. Speaker, it's important for Canadians to have access to internet, and under this government, we have put in place the program to achieve that. I would invite my colleague to consult the program at Industry Canada and to see, in fact, that high-speed internet is available for all Canadians. The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Coalition for Assistance in the case of pyrrhotite launched a National Solidarity Day in Trois-Rivières yesterday. Why? Because the government isn't doing anything to help thousands of families get out of their nightmare. During this time, the government is raking in millions of dollars in taxes on home repairs. When will the minister show some courage and work with the various levels of government to find a solution to help the victims of pyrrhotite? Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm somewhat disappointed in my questions colleague because she should know that that is a file that comes under provincial jurisdiction. In the government, we respect the areas of jurisdiction, and the provinces can take action in their own areas of jurisdiction. The government of Quebec has launched a program, it was back in 2011, in fact, to deal with that challenge. Mr. Speaker, I would tell people who are concerned by this problem to contact the Société d'Habitation du Québec. The honourable member for Mont-Royal. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The imprisonment and torture of Saudian blogger Raf Badawi is a blatant violation of human rights and all of the canons of human decency. Will the government call for an immediate stop and the immediate release of Raif and of his lawyer so that he can be reunited with his family in Quebec? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, Canada considers the punishment that's faced by Mr. Badawi to be a violation of his human dignity. We continue to call for clemency in his case. The promotion and the protection of human rights around the world is an integral part of Canada's foreign policy, and we will continue to pursue that.
The honourable member for Mount Royal.
Mr. Speaker, I hope the next response will be more specific. We are on the eve of the one-year anniversary of the crackdown on peaceful protests in Venezuela, which left 43 dead, 3,000 arrested, and scores of political prisoners, including Leopoldo Lopez, the leader of the Democratic opposition. Will the Canadian government join the U.S., the UN, the European Parliament, the papacy, and other world leaders in calling for the immediate release of Leopoldo Lopez and other political prisoners, an end to domestic repression, and the safeguarding of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in Venezuela? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
As the member opposite knows, we continue to call for those principles around the world, and we will continue to stand strongly for them and continue to speak up on these issues.
Honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou. A resident from Quebec City received a hefty fine from the Customs Services for having brought in food powder containing 2.1% meat. This powder exceeded the limit by 0.1%, and she received an $800 fine. $800? $800 for Beauvril soup powder? That's excessive, Mr. Speaker. And this situation proves that the Conservatives' priorities for security are very misplaced. What is the minister waiting for to respond to this woman?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, this gives me an opportunity to, first of all, to thank the good work that the Canada Border Services Agency does in helping to keep our borders safe. This particular issue, Mr. Speaker, we're of course taking action with our relations with the United States as well. The result of all of our good work that we do as a Conservative government is greater security, continued economic growth, and more jobs for Canadians in years to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
L'honourable deputy. Honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. For the second time in 2 years, there's been an announcement that the post office in Chicoutimi-Nord will be closed. However, an essential service is being offered there, and it's the second most profitable one in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. But the two words, essential and profitable, don't mean anything for the Conservatives. Between 2001 and 2006, they closed 50 post offices and 100 between 2012 and 2013. Can this race to the bottom stop? When we finally saved the post office in Chicoutimi Nord?
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, in 2013, Canada Post delivered $1.2 million fewer letters than in the past. Canada Post must balance its finances without imposing any burden on Canadian taxpayers. We expect nothing less of them.
The honourable member for Wild Rose.
Mr. Speaker, the communities of my riding are filled with hard-working Canadian families. And these families need tax breaks to help with the cost of raising their families, not the opposition's massive spending schemes and carbon taxes that would kill their jobs. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister please update this House on the action that our government is taking to help Canadian families?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Let me thank the member for Wild Rose for sticking up for Canadian families each and every day in this House. Now, Mr. Speaker, we know that the NDP have long advocated a job-killing carbon tax, but recently we also learned that the Liberal leader not only supports a job-killing carbon tax, but is actually encouraging his provincial comrades to bring in the exact same scheme, Mr. Speaker. Look, our government is going to continue to focus on families, Mr. Speaker. The changes that we've made, the investments that we're making will give Canadian families an extra $1,200 in their pocket, Mr. Speaker. That's real benefits, real change, and Canadians know that they can continue to count on us to provide more money in their pocket so they can invest in their priorities. Thank you.
The honourable member for Humber St. Barbara.
Mr. Speaker, in the government's response to a report from the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans concerning small craft harbours, a suggestion, no, a promise was made to this House and to the thousands of volunteer members of our country's harbour authorities that the government would not cut the very lifelines needed to manage these harbours for the mutual benefit of both DFO and the communities. Yet in Newfoundland and Labrador, that's exactly what's happening. Cuts to staff, cuts to training, cuts to DFO offices. Why the double cross to our harbour authorities and the volunteers? Why was Parliament deceived?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Fisheries and Oceans.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to assure this member that our government values our small craft harbour authorities and their volunteers. Their communities and industry benefit greatly from their work, and they are to be commended for it.
Hear, hear.
But let me be clear on behalf of the Minister that we will not endorse any change that will result in the reduction of frontline services to harbour authorities. In fact, after considering the input received from our volunteers, the Minister can confirm that the third area manager position will be maintained. So discussions are ongoing with our harbour authorities and volunteers to ensure that their needs are met. Thank you.
The honourable member for Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Westdale.
Mr. Speaker, thanks to the leadership of our Prime Minister, Canada's had the best job creation record in the G7 since 2006 when we were elected. While we're focused on creating jobs, the Liberal Party has the same old high-tax, big government, high-debt agenda that will threaten jobs and set working families back. Given our government's unprecedented focus on the economy, can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance please update us on the job numbers for Canada today?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from Ancaster, Dundas, Flamborough, Westdale for that excellent question. I am pleased to tell the House today that employment increased in January by over 35,000 jobs. In addition, Canada has created over 1.2 million net new jobs since the economic downturn in 2009. Over 87% of these jobs are full-time, and the overwhelming majority are high-paying and in the private sector. Unlike the opposition's plan to increase taxes, we will continue to move forward with lowering taxes and providing benefits directly to families for them to reinvest into the Canadian economy.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, the IMF has recommended that the governments of the G20 fund a major global infrastructure initiative using borrowing, not austerity measures. Despite the government's rhetoric, the IMF and many other public finance experts have warned us that we're entering a long period of economic stagnation, high unemployment, and a widening inequality gap between the rich and poor. It's time for the Minister of Finance to wake up. Does he not agree with these experts?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, under our government, middle-class Canadians are better off because of our Conservative government. The median net worth of Canadian families has increased by 45% since we've taken office. For the first time, middle-income Canadians are better off than the Americans. The average Canadian family pays nearly $3,400 less in taxes, and now every family with children in Canada will stand to benefit from our latest tax breaks, including the increase and the expansion of the universal child care benefit and the new family tax cut. Shamefully, the opposition would take these benefits away.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. Mr. Speaker, a simple yes or no would have been enough. The government is balancing its budget on the backs of the regions, citizens, the environment and our infrastructure. That leaves a heavy debt to pay. The regions are facing negative economic growth, rural exodus by young people, and the unemployment rate is on the rise. Why doesn't the government take advantage of historically low interest rates to return power and capabilities to our regions and not just to urban areas?
L'Honorable Secrétaire Parlementaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Canada Regional Development Agency for Quebec offers economic development services for all regions of Quebec, and we are going to look at all projects and assess them based on merit. The Honourable Member for Verchères les Patriotes. Mr. Speaker, since last fall, many people in my riding have expressed concerns with respect to the alarming number of youth suicides. This is National Suicide Prevention Week, and I'd like to remind the House of certain facts. Statistics Canada has said there have been some 270 suicides among young people aged 10 to 19 per year. And for each attempted suicide, there are apparently 200, or each suicide, 200 attempted suicide. It's possible to prevent suicide by ensuring that people with mental illness receive the care they need. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to know if the government intends to respond to this request from Partners for Mental Health to create a national suicide prevention strategy for young people.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Again, Mr. Speaker, we understand how important these issues are. That's why we've made significant investments with our provincial partners in mental health issues, Mr. Speaker. At the same time, one of the most important things that we've done since taking office in 2006 is to reverse the decade of health care cuts that was a hallmark of the Liberal government, Mr. Speaker. We've increased transfers to our provincial partners by about 6% a year, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to do that in the future because we understand how important health care is to Canadians. And, Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Justice relating to Bill C-51, the Act to create a new secret police. I'm wondering if he can answer two specific questions. One is whether the... If I can continue with... There was too much... If I may continue, Mr. Speaker, the question to the Minister of Justice is simple. Two things. Will he amend the Act to ensure that non-violent civil disobedience is precluded from the ambit of the Act? And two, can he please explain to this House the purpose of Part 4, Section 42, that in taking measures to reduce the threat to the security of Canada, CSIS shall not, quote, violate the sexual integrity of an individual? Why was that?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Speaker, with respect to the first part of her question, I think that over-the-top rhetoric is quite insulting to our security forces. Second part of her question, Mr. Speaker, regarding the protections against lawful protest, this is covered by the Act. This does not pose a threat to individuals who engage in lawful assembly. And I spoke to the earlier part of her question with regard to the mandate of CSIS not extending beyond its lawful authority and, of course, being subject to judicial oversight.
This concludes question period. I believe the Honourable NDP House Leader is rising on point of order.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. During question period, the member for Ottawa Orleans yelled some disrespectful comments about the member of Beauharnois-Salaberry. This is a member who has been in the House for a long time. He knows what's appropriate and what isn't, and I would ask him to excuse himself to the member for Beauharnois-Salaberry and withdraw his remarks.
The chair also heard the comment that has been referred to. And first of all, I would like to remind all honourable members that when one of their colleagues has the floor, they ought to be listening rather than speaking. And so in that context, any comment is inappropriate. But I think I will allow the honourable member from Ottawa Orleans to address this if he wishes, and failing that, the chair will return to the House if necessary. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for National Defence. Same point of order?
No different point of order, Mr. Speaker. I just want to assure the House that the Minister of National Defence is representing Canada at the Munich Security Conference on Iraq, as was alluded to that he wasn't by the member from Ottawa Centre.
So that was a point of order, more a point of clarification. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for Labour on a different point of order?